love to like hear a little bit from you guys about like the history of OPEX, why tempo training is one of the principles that we incorporate in our education, and like how we kind of became known as the tempo guys in the functional fitness world.
Yeah, I mean, gosh.
I
Yeah,
think it's the bodybuilding background. I mean,
yeah.
like, I don't know about you, but 2001, I started lifting weights in Gold's Gym. And, I mean, I used lots of tempo training, but it wasn't written the way James did. But, I mean, you'd be doing, like, fatigue-based sets, but you'd have to just, like, go as slow as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, my intro to tempo training, I didn't know that it was even called tempo at this time, was when I was like, that 13, 14-year-old doing concentration curls. I had no fucking idea why I was doing these things, but I'm like, I need to go up for 5 seconds, and I need to pause, and I need to go down for 5 seconds. And then you do that, and then you start to feel like, oh man, I'm using a small percentage of what I usually use when I'm doing like standing, alternating, hip kipping bicep curls to try to lift as much weight as possible. You're like, even as like a 13-year-old boy, I'm like, there's something to this, right? So naturally you start to do other exercises, and you just implement that principle because you feel it, and you're like, there's something there, right? Like, I'm waking up and my muscles are a little more sore the next day and all of that. So, without knowing it, or just doing it in a very dumb way, that's when I first started using tempo in my own training. It was just like experimenting and using it in improper ways, and thinking that was like the end all be all, and like just everything had to be 5-1, 5-1, no matter what I was doing. But kind of growing up and, getting introduced to like real strength conditioning, we started doing it in high school, where it was like the reason we were doing it is because it was based on progression, right? And we had that, like, we had a decent strength conditioning coach in high school, and he taught us some really good principles around that. And then growing up and, going through the academic setting, obviously it's there, right, where it's like, training protocols and things to consider, and time under tension and all of that. And then taking a really deep dive into like PICP, and Paul Lequin, his whole thing was built around, sets, reps, tempo. Like, you have to understand those things to build an effective training program. And that's where James's head was with that as well, where it's like, you can't prescribe strength training without tempo. Like, how do you do it without tempo? Like,
yeah, it's kind of laughable because, how you say we're known as the tempo people in fitness. I mean, until I found CrossFit, and that was like 2009. It was around way before. You didn't move weight as fast as, that wasn't like a thing, move the weight as fast as possible. I'm thinking of every single fitness experience I had outside of, in a weight room, if you played football or something and you're in hang cleans. But that's more of a technical movement. It's not about like pulling that bar as fast as you can. So it seems kind of funny that it's like we're the tempo. There's always kind of been tempo in fitness. Then you have this idea of move as fast as you possibly can. Who cares what you look like? And then I think James was like, whoa, like, let's get back to some basics here when it comes to developing strength and, being able to have this buffer zone so you can move faster along the, we got to develop along the strength continuum.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, it's like, what is the intention on the person or the people that are doing the exercise?
Yeah.
And we've just been kind of across the entire spectrum of like the S&C world, the CrossFit world, the general population. We want to live long and prosper world. And the constant is tempo and understanding how fast you're moving or not, right? Like you're saying in the S&C world, if you're an Olympic sprinter, you do want to turn on those fast twitch muscle fibers, right? Like, you don't really give a shit about, having greater endurance in your muscle fibers and biasing more oxidative pieces inside of there. You're just like, I need to perform like this all the time. And, it's seen as, when I'm moving slow and controlled and doing that, it's more for like rehabilitation, or it's for, like away from competing. But even in like the S&C world relative to football and stuff like that, we're just so young in that still. I mean, there has been strength conditioning coaches for a very long time, but relatively we're still young in that. So think about strength conditioning 20 years ago, and I'm not saying every strength conditioning coach took this approach, but where did those coaches learn about exercise? they learned it through an organization that was teaching based off of bodybuilding principles. So I just think about my experiences in S&C and why we were doing what we were doing. A lot of that shit was actually aesthetics-based principles. Those were aesthetics-based principles that we were doing inside of the gym. And there's some validity to that, right? Like a bigger muscle has a larger opportunity to be strong and powerful. So I get it. But we were using like hypertrophy principles and trying to get bigger, a week before training camp. And you look at that now and you're like, we shouldn't have done that. Actually, we should have stopped that a couple months prior, and we should have been on the field a lot more. And when we did go into the gym, it should have just been like preservation stuff, or we didn't want to lose what we've gained in the past 8 months. So I think we've learned a lot over the past couple decades, but I just go back to a lot of people know what they know, right? So it's like, if I know that this thing is going to make me bigger, I'm going to bias this thing. And that's where a lot of these principles came from.